Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, where I seek truth in the world's best books. I'm your host, Eric Rostad, coming to you from the beautiful Books of Titans studio in Franklin, Tennessee. My goal is to read 52 books per year and share what I'm learning. I'll talk a bit about each book, tie ideas together from a variety of genres, and share the one thing I always hope to remember from each book. Today I have a special episode where I'm going to talk about the status of this reading project. Next year, I'm embarking on phase 2 of this reading project, Books of Titans. I've been in phase 1, and I've been in phase 1 for almost the last 6 years. In phase 1, my goal has been to read 52 books per year, and also to put practices in place where I remember what I read. So I didn't want to just read a bunch of books and then not remember anything about them. But there are all these books that I was finding I was wanting to read. So I was making these lists of books. I was like, well, how can I get through the most of these? So I set a challenge for myself to try to read one a week. And so I would make these lists, narrow them down to 52 books, randomize the order so I didn't stack all the ones I was super excited about in January. And then I would just start on January 1st and read as much as I could through that list until December 31st, and then start again in the following year. It has been so much fun. I've had a blast with the project. I've read some incredible books. I've connected with incredible people around the world, and I've learned a lot. And one of the things that I have learned is that books come from books. Now, that may seem to be the most obvious thing you've ever heard, but let me give an example here. In 2018, one of the books I had on my list, it was early in the year, it was Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And that was a hard book to get through. It was pretty dense, and there was a lot of material in there, and but it was very important information, and I knew that it was an important book when I was reading it. Well, later that year and into 2019, between that time, I read 5 other books that basically took one idea from Thinking Fast and Slow and applied it to that author's area of expertise. And while I was reading those books, I'm thinking, I read Daniel Kahneman's book, and that idea was in there, along with a number of other ideas. That was kind of the source book. And these other 5 books really are children of that book. And so it would have been better for me had I just read that one book, the Thinking Fast and Slow, and not bothered with these other 5. And so when I say books come from books, that's one small example. So these 5 other books came from Daniel Kahneman. Well, Daniel Kahneman came from a book, and his ideas came from research but reading and books and that sort of thing. And then just further back, there are these great books. There's a canon out there of books that have influenced a lot of the other books. So instead of reading like just not having like a real design in reading, I may end up reading a lot of these kind of lesser books, or these child books of overall parent books. And when I started seeing that over and over again, I was thinking, I need to identify these important books and then focus on reading those. Now, fast forward to 2021. So last year, I listened to 2 different podcast episodes, and I don't remember the second one, but I remember it impacting me. But I do remember the first one was an Econ Talk episode with Leon Kass. And Leon Kass was talking about the great books and reading through the great books, and I think also teaching the great books. And it just got me thinking, maybe this is something that I should do. And it just sort of clicked after hearing those 2 episodes. And I looked at my bookshelves, and I'd been collecting the great books for like 20 plus years. My shelves are filled with the great books, but I've never read them. And I have read some for phase 1 of this project, but there were so many on my shelves that I had this desire to get to them at some point in the future. I want to read them. They hold some sort of a mystery to me. I want to know what's inside of them. But I guess another thing I've learned in phase 1 of this project is that, at least for me, if I don't have some sort of a plan, I'm not going to get to these books. they'll just sit on my shelves the rest of my life. And I might get to them. I might get to like a few of them, but without having a plan, I'll gravitate to other things and not get to the books that I really want to read. So next year, I am embarking on phase 2 of this project where I'm going to read 200 of the great books. Phase 1 has been these past 6 years. But I expect phase 2 with these 200 great books, I expect that to take even longer than my first 6 years. I expect that to take 8 to 10 years. I'm dropping my goal of reading 52 books per year once I move to the great books. Some of these are going to be really long books and really difficult books, and I know they're going to take time, and I don't want to rush through these. I want to dwell in them. I want to take my time. And so I find that I work well under constraints. I have a number of rules for the Books of Titans reading project. I've covered those in past episodes, but here are the rules that I'm going to have going into phase 2 here with the great books. Rule number 1, and just I view these kind of as guidelines. Guidelines or rules for how this great books portion of this project will function. And so the first is this goal of 200 total books. I think it'll end up being more than that. For instance, I don't want to just read one book by Plato. I want to read different books of Plato, different ones of Aristotle. And so I know with some of the authors, I'll be reading multiple books. Another rule is nothing younger than 50 years. So the newest book that I can read has to at least be 50 years old. So as of the list I'm running with right now, the newest book would be a Flannery O'Connor book. I will read them in order from oldest to newest. So the oldest book, the one that I will start out with, is Gilgamesh. And that is I guess the oldest known book, or one of them. But that's the one that I have right now on my list as the oldest book. I'm going to start with that one, and then I'm just going to go in chronological order until the newest book on the list. Here's a rule that may differ from other people going through the great books. I'm going to start each year by reading the Bible. I did that in the year 2000. I started off the year. It took me 60 days. So that was a leap year. And so I finished on February 29th of that year. So I know roughly the first 2 months of each year, I'll be reading the Bible. And there's a few reasons for that. One is I want to. It's on the great books list as well. But one of my goals and reasons for doing this reading project is to see how the Bible has influenced other works and how maybe we see aspects of the Bible or the narrative of the Bible in other works. And so if that's a goal of mine, I want that to be at the forefront of my mind each year as I'm going in to reading the great books. So each year I start by reading the Bible. This is another key thing that I will be doing, is that in July and December of each year, as I go through the great books, those will be kind of rest months. And in the sense that they will be open for me to read other things. And so I will be focusing on the great books in all the other months, but every July and every December, that's kind of free reading. Like I know I'm going to need a mental break because a lot of these great books are very, very deep. And so it's partly to just leave some space for that. But then there's also some books I know that will be coming out in the next few years that I will want to read. And then I'm a business manager at a bookshop, and we always have authors coming in, and I want to read some of their books. I just want to stay up on that as well. So this was a suggestion. Thank you, Mandy. But 2 months out of each year to have time to just read other things other than the great books. So really, 4 months out of each year, with January and February being pretty much devoted to reading through the Bible, and then July and December, I'll be spending 8 months each year where I'm super focused on the great books. Last rule or guideline is that I want to have a supplemental or a complementary book for each of the great books. And what I mean by that is a more recent book that has been written about the Great Book that maybe gives some cultural background, some historical perspective, maybe goes in deeper as to what the book is about. So my plan is to read the Great Book first and then to read that supplemental book after that, really for the purpose of better understanding. These works they have so much going on that I may capture 1% of what's actually going on. I just want to go deeper and learn more. And since I'm doing this by myself, I want to have these supplemental materials where I can really dig in. So that's another rule that I'll have for this project. As far as the list and how I've compiled the list, I will link in the show notes to my current list of these 200 books. And I've thought a lot about I've been planning this out for many months now. But I've consulted a number of sources, and I list those sources at the bottom of the list. So check out the show notes. I do want you to go to that list and take a look. And I'd love your thoughts on it. And I'll get into that a little bit more in this episode. But I have the list. I have it in order from oldest to newest. And I've consulted a number of sources, and most of the time when you're looking at the Great Books lists, they call it the Western canon. So most of the time it's the books that have shaped Western civilization. But I don't want to just do Western civilization. So I've made it a point to look at other sources that pull from books from the East as well. On my list, you'll see most of the major religious texts that are kind of the foundational texts for the world's major religions. So I'm kind of expanding outside of just the Western canon. I do want to make a point to have books from all over the world and not just from the Western canon, although that will be the large majority of the books. In terms of other sources, I've reached out to people that I respect for their guidance. There's people who have read a lot of the great books, or they're part of a group that have read the great books. And so I've reached out to people like that, where I've shared my list and just said, I'd love your thoughts. Am I missing anything? Would you suggest different books by the authors you're seeing here? That kind of thing. Also, this episode is kind of a call for your help as well. So if you're listening and you've read some of the great books, I'd love your suggestions. So there's a form on the page where I'm listing these great books. Please make suggestions, and please make suggestions on the complementary or the supplemental books as well. Like, do you know a good book about the Odyssey? Do you know a good book about Chesterton or Frankenstein or David Copperfield or The Scarlet Letter? Like, do you know books that offer deep and good insight into some of these great books? That's where I'm really going to need a lot of help, because there's so many lists out there of the great books, but there's not as many lists out there about supplemental materials. And then just in terms of the list, I'm saying 200 books very loosely, because it'll probably end up being more like 250, and that's just the great books. That's not the supplemental books as well. But the 250, just because it'll be multiple books by some of the authors, maybe like Shakespeare or Aristotle or Plato. Like I don't want to just read one from them. As for the collecting of these books, as I mentioned, I already have a lot of these books. I've been collecting them for a lot of my life. And so this is just a natural extension in my life. This just fits. But I do want to go for the best translations. I want to go for beautiful books. I want to go for the best versions of these books. So if you know what those are, I would love to hear from you. And as I mentioned before, I have read some of the great books in phase 1. And so in phase 2 here, I will be doubling up in the sense of I'll be rereading some of these, and other ones since I've already read them, I won't read them again. So there may be a book that you're like, oh, there's a big one you're missing here, but I may have already read that in phase 1 of this project. Another thing is that I do plan to keep this podcast going through phase 2. And so it may not be as regular, but I do want to cover the great books and what I'm learning and how I'm seeing these great books tie together. So that's the hope right now that I keep this podcast going throughout this. I can't wait. I mean, when I think about starting phase 2 and reading through the great books, I'm so excited about it. In a lot of ways, my life has led up to this, even in terms of the books that I've been buying and collecting. I don't know how much longer I have on Earth, but I don't want to die without having read these great books. Now comes the part of the episode where I invite you. So I want to invite you in 3 different ways here. The first way is, do you want to do this with me? Do you want to read through the great books with me? It's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. It will be completely countercultural to read through all this while everyone else is scrolling social media. There will be a lot of sacrifices you'll have to make to do this, but it will be a journey through the world's best books. And I think it'll be something special. So first invitation here is, do you want to do this with me? The second invitation is that I'm still thinking through this, but I want to offer some way in that, not for every book, but some of them along the way where I open it up to group discussions. Ideally, I would like to hold these discussions at Landmark Booksellers here in Franklin, Tennessee, but then also open them up via Zoom or some other technology to where we can discuss these books together. So if that's something that you'd be interested, please let me know. You can email me, eric@booksoftitans.com. And just, if you've signed up for the Books of Titans newsletter, I'll keep everyone updated on what books that I would be doing for discussion. So that's the second way of getting involved. The third way is what I've mentioned before, where I need help. I need help in figuring out the best list of the 200 books, of figuring out what books can work with the other ones. So I would invite you to come to the website and fill out that form and just give me some ideas. I record this podcast each week, and it's right in front of my bookshelves. It's actually, I've got these built-in bookshelves, and the microphone here and everything is just it's built in, it's connected to this desk and bookshelves. And my bookshelves are divided into 4 groups, four overall shelves. And the first 2 main shelves are almost completely full of books from phase 1. And on my bookshelf, I have them in order of what I've read them since 2017 until now. That helps me visualize just, where I read them in what order. And it helps when I look at them just to kind of remember what was in each of them. And so that's the first 2 sets. And I love that it almost exactly cuts off right at the end of that second shelf. Now I've got these 2 other shelves, and I've got a bunch of the great books in them already, but these other 2 shelves are going to be where I put the great books. And they're going to include the books that I'm reading and discussing and looking over for the next 10 years. And so I love that. This is just kind of a natural stopping point in the project and a switch to a new phase. And it's just even visually right in front of me every single day as I'm working this division of books into phase 1 and phase 2. I've even thought about after this, after 10 years from now, after I've finished reading through the great books, what do I want to do? And I think after that, as of right now, I'm thinking of reading and picking an author and devoting a year to that author. For example, there are some authors that I want to read all their books, and that is C.S. Lewis, George MacDonald, Cormac McCarthy, Shakespeare, Wendell Berry, just to name a few. I've just started jotting these names down. So maybe 10 years from now, that'll be what I'm doing. But I'm 42 years right now. I'm 42 years old right now, and I would like to get through the great books by the time I'm 50. That's 8 years. That'll be a stretch. I kind of think it's going to be more around 10 years. But that's the plan right now. That's moving from phase 1 to phase 2, and I would love for you to be a part of that, or even just follow me in the journey and keep listening to this podcast and find out what I'm learning, and I will keep sharing that with you. Thanks for listening to this episode. Again, check the show notes. I'll have the link to my list of 200 books that I put together so far. Thank you for following me along on this journey as well. It's been so much fun, and I look forward to continuing it and in starting to read through these great books. That'll be it for today. Tune in again next week. I'll be covering another book from this year's reading project. And until then, keep reading, keep listening, and keep thinking. I'm out.